I've got a lot of great questions today, and I think the main one is on foods in the 18th century and did people understand their nutritional value? I want to thank you for joining me today on Questions and Answers with James Townsend and Son. Here's our first question today, and it was on, many of these questions are on the Tinware video that we did in the middle of last week. Bill Andrews says, with regards to tin canteens, what if I line it with beeswax or pitch like the wooden canteen? With regards to your tin canteen and lining it, yes, you definitely can line your tin canteen with beeswax or with brewer's pitch. Brewer's pitch is going to last a little bit longer, but it'll have more flavor to it. You may not like the pine flavor. Some people like it, some people don't. So that's kind of one thing or the other. But it makes the tin canteen last so much longer. You don't get rust on the inside. It's very hard to get all the liquid out of the inside of a tin canteen, and so they are prone to rusting from the inside out. So that's definitely an issue, and whenever possible, lining the tin canteen will help it last much longer. The next question is ill-made too. Was enamelware common in the time period? How common was it? I've always preferred it to tinware, both in use and appearance. Enamelware is sometimes called porcelainware. This is not time period correct. The Germans were experimenting with a process in the late 18th century, having to do something similar to porcelainware, what we would call enamelware today, lining the inside of cast iron vessels and similar for these kind of purposes. The interior is difficult to keep clean. You want to keep rust out, and so they were experimenting with this process. It doesn't really get common until the 19th century, and not actually very common in everyday use until after the middle of the 19th century. Here in North America, we kind of got really good at that process after the 1850s. So that's when the heyday of enamelware and porcelainware really comes in. And it is a superior product. That's why they developed it. It is very sturdy. It's easy to clean, and it's still light. It's sturdy in regards to it, it not getting rusty, although you still can get a dent in it and the porcelain flakes off, and then of course you immediately have rust and you might as well throw the pot out. But the enamelware is a great product, and you can make it look fancy, but it is not correct for the 18th century or even the early 19th century. And here's another question. This one's from Robert Firelion Winkler. And he says, what about pewter? When did folks switch from tin to pewter or stainless steel? Pewterware and tinware kind of are happening at the same time in the 18th century. There isn't necessarily a switch from one to the other, but tinware lasts longer, as in keeps being popular later on, say in the 19th century, after pewterware has sort of fallen out of favor. Pewter does have some advantages and does have some disadvantages. Obviously, pewter in the 18th century, a lot of it had a lead component that, of course, we wouldn't use today. But it was, you were capable of melting it down and turning it into new pewter. It's fairly easily damaged, dented, especially if it was a thin item. But if the style changed and you wanted something that looked newer, you could have your old pewter melted down and cast into newer items. So it does have some advantages. But cleaning, it's pretty simple to clean. Just like anything else, you didn't really have to worry about it rusting. So it does have advantages and disadvantages. Here's a question from Gonzo42. He says, why don't you monetize your videos? There's a couple good reasons why I don't monetize videos. Number one, I don't necessarily care for advertisements. I think they're kind of intrusive, especially when they're in front of your video or whatever. So I don't necessarily care for them. And in another sense, the videos in their entirety are kind of an advertisement for James Townsend and Son. So it's kind of like having an ad on top of an advertisement. So that's why I don't necessarily think they're good for what we do. Not that that's a problem with other people. Also, with monetizing, the number of views that we get, the monetization would be tiny and really wouldn't be worth the point or the effort. It would be much more of an aggravation for you with the advertisements, and we would get very little money out of it. So that's mainly the reason why we don't monetize our videos. Here's Old Gravely. He's got a question about our cast ironware that we sell in the catalog and on the website. He says, is the cast iron made in the United States? We actually sell both kinds. The Dutch ovens that we sell are imported Dutch ovens, and the cast iron pots that we have, the round, small, the 2-quart pot and the 5-quart pot, those are both made in Indiana, right just about 15 miles south of the shop. They're cast at a local foundry. The reason why we carry foreign-made Dutch ovens is because these Dutch ovens don't have any writing on the top of them, and obviously Dutch ovens in the 18th century wouldn't have had any kind of writing on them. These do have the company impressed in the bottom of them, but of course you can't see that. So it's actually a much better design for what we do, and that's basically the reason why we carry a foreign-made Dutch oven instead of a U.S.-made Dutch oven. This one is from Marslano Mello. He says, do you guys do all of your dishes in one take? It seems that every time you finish, it's perfect. Well, we're not always perfect, that's for sure. Most of the time, if it's an item that takes a lot of cooking, we have pre-prepared the finished dish, because the amount of time it takes to sit there and wait for it to finish so you can finish your video, just it isn't very efficient in the working process. We have a lot of videos to make, and so and we can't wait for something to cook for 4 hours and then bring it out. Now, is it perfect every time? Not necessarily. We don't always get it right, and if you watch all the videos through, you'll see some, and you'll even see that in the comments. Oh, they overcooked that, or that one didn't seem done enough. But they still turn out good. And everything doesn't always turn out perfect. So, is it perfect every time? No. But it's still the process, and it's still about the cooking and about the flavors and about the system. And, it didn't turn out perfect every time for them in the 18th century. So it certainly doesn't turn out perfect every time when we cook today. Sometimes it's not quite done, or it needs to be done more. So it isn't perfect every time, even though it might look closer. It's not perfect every time, but we try. Here's a question that's from that the Getting Started sort of case study that we did that with Kevin, and he was doing his Samuel Larkin impression. And this is BLZ 346. I'm a little confused about the difference between first-person and third-person reenacting. Are you just describing how it's done in the third person and essentially role-playing in the first? I think that's probably a pretty quick way of saying it. It's sort of like when you have a character or a book, and whether it's written in the first person or in the third person. If you write a book in the third person, you say, he did this, he walked there and then he did that, and maybe he felt this thing or that thing. And when you are writing in the first person, you're saying, I did this thing, I went this place, So it's the same thing in reenacting. When we do third person reenacting, we might be dressed in exactly the right kind of clothes, and we might be doing exactly the right kind of thing, but we would say, in the 18th century, they did it such and such a way. Whereas when you do first person, you actually try to be that character. You're trying to, you take on the persona of that person in the 18th century, and you try to think like them and talk like them and do the things like them and have an interaction that same way. And it has limitations, but it also has some real advantages. But it definitely is a level up in skill, and some people aren't comfortable with it. It was weird really early on in the channel when I was thinking about kind of bringing this kind of information to the audience. And to new reenactors, I really was kind of concerned about talking too much about first person, because it can be very, very intimidating And people, if they think that's what they have to do reenacting, would just shy away from it, not want to do it. But it is something, it's definitely something that you would do later on after you get started, after you, do all the other things and maybe experiment with a little third person first. Then maybe it's time to try first person. It definitely is a way for you to learn more as the reenactor, to try to put on that person in the 18th century. It isn't perfect, but it is a lot of fun, and it is a way to really learn some interesting things. Here's an interesting one from Raising Cain. He says, just a quick question. Is the purpose of the persona to preserve the people and the behaviors of the chosen time and display them to others, or is it more of a personal learning experience? Just like I was saying in that last question, it's both. It's both a good way of teaching, and it's a very interesting way of learning yourself. So I would say there's definitely both in there, and it really depends on the person. Some people get more out of delivering that to other people, and some people really almost do it by themselves just for their own personal learning. So there's some of both. And here's the main question. This is Andrew Wahlberg. He says, "Hi John, I'm a huge fan of the channel. I hope you keep making videos forever. I've wanted to ask, do you think people in the 18th century had any idea of the nutritional information in their food? Things like complex versus simple carbs, protein content, unhealthy saturated fats versus unsaturated fats, vitamins and minerals. Similarly, were chronic diseases related to nutrition simply less common back then, or were there just fewer treatments for them? Thank you so much for the info." It's a really good question, and obviously there's all kinds of people in the 18th century over a large, a swath of mankind, and some people know more about what's going on with food than others. For hundreds of years before the 18th century, there was a connection between food and disease. Specifically to his question here about chronic diseases in food, there were lots of chronic diseases related to food in the 18th century, scurvy being one of them. And some people, they were the scientific kind of people in the time period were specifically looking for answers to these kinds of questions. And you'll find a lot of that information being worked on in the 18th century. And some people did understand the connection between food and disease, and other people, didn't. There's a lot going on here. It's a great place to study kind of the kernels of modern medicine, maybe the best parts of modern medicine happening in the 18th century. The medicine and the ideas around food were really, really primitive to our knowledge, but you can see where they're really working on finding those answers and thinking that they understood there was a connection between food and disease. Did they understand, carbs versus protein and fats and all that kind of stuff? No, not really. But you'll definitely find different people in the 18th century with specific thoughts about that. In the 18th century, you'll find doctors specifically talking about the idea of whole wheat bread versus white bread. And they thought that whole wheat bread would be much more healthy for people to eat. But yet the populace was not interested in healthy. They wanted white bread. So to answer your question really quickly, in a short way, did they understand carbs, proteins, fats? No. I would say the vast majority of people had no idea what was going on with that. But they did know that certain foods were healthy, other foods were not healthy, and just from common experience. And there is definitely a lot of scientific thought or going on right here in the 18th century where people are starting to really delve into these questions. There's still a few days left. If you're interested in one of our calendars where we have all our favorite recipes from this last season, last year, if you're interested in one of those, there'll be a link to head down in there. You can get one of those for just $1. That really just pays for shipping. Also, we have, if you enjoy the music that we use in all our cooking videos, that's the group that we use for all the music in almost every video that we use is Jim's Red Pants. We have their new Christmas CD available right now, and I'll put a link to that. It's called A Winter's Tale. It's full of a bunch of great music. So if you like the music in the cooking videos, go and check that out. I want to thank everyone for your tremendous support for what we do, your comments, your questions, the shares that you give our videos, and the views and the thumbs ups. Really, I want to thank you so much for all that you do, and thank you so much for watching. If you're a new viewer and you haven't subscribed, press the subscribe button up here. That'll take you to a spot where you can subscribe. I want to thank everyone for watching.